So now let's talk about the process of how do we actually do this particular step. And it's really important that the whole group is involved, not just the person who came up with this idea. And basically what we're going to do is we're taking the set of questions that I showed you earlier about the external, the internal, and the dynamic, and we very systematically go through the room and ask, okay, so what would have to be true about the internal, the external, and the dynamic world for this possibility to be a good one? So you can imagine we're getting a long list of conditions under each of these possibilities. At the end of this process, what has to be true is the following. We have to say, let's look at possibility number 1 and let's look at all of these conditions. Now you tell the group, assume for a moment that we could show to all of you that all of these conditions are met. Would you now be willing to wholeheartedly support this particular idea, this particular possibility? And everyone in the room better raise their hand and say, yes, if you could tell me that all of these conditions are true, I would be completely behind that particular idea. If you have the case that someone says, you know what? No, not really. That's important information because there's apparently still something missing. So we have to go back to that person and say, why not? Why aren't you fully behind this idea? There must be still something that's bugging you. And we need to pull this out, right? And that is really the important piece of this particular process, this particular step, that we really want to get all of the concerns out because, again, this may be not a good idea after all. Sometimes a playful exercise to do at this point in the process to create even more ideas of why something might go wrong is a process that Gary Klein calls a pre-mortem. You may have heard about post-mortems. Those are basically if something went really bad, we want to understand why did it go bad, or if a patient died, why did a patient die? Now a pre-mortem basically asks the following. It says, let's imagine we've done this particular possibility and imagine it was a complete and utter failure. Why did this happen? Why was this a big failure? Think about it. You're like a journalist who is writing a story about this abysmal failure, in this case, let's say, of Procter & Gamble trying to reposition Olay. And by engaging that is actually sometimes a fun exercise, and you might come up with a whole set of reasons and come up with an interesting story of why that particular idea actually turned out to be a really bad idea. And I think that exercise can help us sometimes to reveal kind of the conditions that would actually have to be true for this possibility to be a good one. So again, to repeat, what is really important at this part in the process is not to debate of whether or not one of these conditions is true. Right now, we just want to come up with this well-specified hypothesis. Now, as you can imagine, this process sometimes ends up with a very long set of conditions under each possibility. So maybe in the next step, what we can do is we can cull this list and reduce the number of conditions that are really necessary to know. And the way to do this is to basically go condition by condition and ask, imagine we can show that all of the remaining conditions still hold. Would you still, everyone in the room, be fine with eliminating this particular condition? And so sometimes we can eliminate a couple of these conditions because some of them are would be nice to know that that would be true, but not really necessary. But again, at the end of this process, we still need to have full agreement in the room that if we can show you that all of these conditions that now remain under each of these possibilities, if all of these conditions are true, yes, that would be a terrific choice for us to do, and we are all really very supportive of that idea. In the next part of this process, we need to socialize everyone else within the organization who has eventually to sign off on these ideas. The person who writes the check. Right? So now that we've done this work, we have our set of possibilities and we have these conditions under each of these possibilities, what we need to do is we need to take all of that analysis to this next person and do the same exercise with them and saying, look, here's an idea. If we could show you that all of these conditions actually hold true, would you be willing to sign the check and be completely behind us for this particular possibility? And again, if that person says, not really, then we need to get their concerns, because that person may see certain interdependencies across an organization that our team didn't know. Maybe that person says, yes, but you also have to show me that this possibility, if we do that, doesn't affect that division over there. So that's really important, because we don't want to go through this entire process and then come to this stage where we present our final possibilities, the one that we really wanted to do, and someone else says, nah, I don't like it, because you haven't thought about X, Y, or Z. So we want to get that information right now. Now, what is really helpful is if you include your existing strategy, your status quo choices, in the set of possibilities and treat it as if it were a new idea. So ask the same questions that you asked about any new idea about your existing strategy. What would have to be true about the world for our existing strategy to be a good one? And that is actually a very interesting exercise, and sometimes interesting things can come out of that. Actually, in one of the companies we were at this point of the proceedings, the CEO jumped out of his seat and ran out of the room. Now, we were a bit scared, what just happened? 10 minutes later, the CEO comes back and we ask him, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, no, I'm fine." But after just having seen all these conditions that would have to be true for our existing strategy to be a good one, I'm not quite so sure anymore about this. And so I just ran out of the room and canceled a $10 million investment that would have strengthened our existing strategy. So treating your existing strategy on sort of equal footing with these new ideas is, I think, a very good practice, because the status quo choices, our current strategy, is not necessarily without risks either. Quite often we think, our existing strategy has sort of no risk and any change is very risky. But of course, in an environment that changes, our existing strategy also involves risks. And so treating them on somewhat more equal footing, I think, is a very good practice. So lastly, kind of to summarize, again, there is a subtle but really important mind shift in this particular step of the process. And that is to shift from this question of what do I believe to what would I have to believe. Again, that shift lowers the temperature in the room and really allows us to lay out a well-specified hypothesis that we can then test in the next step.